So the main theme of this week's parasha is the first half of the parasha deals with the Miraglim, with the story of the spies or the scouts who go out to the land. They give they bring back a bad report because Moshe and Aaron and Caleb and Yoshua are against them, and then Hashem punishes them, and then they try to go up anyway. That's the Mapilim, and then Hashem punishes them. Moshe begs for forgiveness. So at the end of that's the first part of the portion, without question. But then, since we focused on that on Monday, and also since during our Rashi study in the afternoons, we studied that, I wanted to really focus now on the second part of the portion. The second part of the portion is much less frequently discussed and studied in weekly Parasha Shiurim. And I want to go backwards, but first I want to just review with everybody so everybody is familiar with what's in it. And then we'll start to read the last passage and we'll go backwards if we have time. Now let me just briefly survey the second part of the Torah portion so people are aware of what's in it. So right after we have the story of the Jewish people who were decided to try to go into the land, which is called the Ma'apilim, even though they weren't able to. Then immediately after that, Hashem says to them the mitzvah of the libations, the nisachim. These are when you have a sacrifice. God says to Moshe, "Lemor, speak to the children of Israel and say, when you come to the land that I give to you." That's the very next verse. Meaning to say, and then it gives us the esoteric law, and you bring an olah or a voluntary offering on your holidays to bring a sacrifice to God, and then you have to bring along with it a libation. What's the libation? You bring some flour offering along with the animal, and also flour should be mixed with oil and a wine libation, and it gives the different measurements that are supposed to accompany which animal offering. So what's the significance? First of all, why do you have to bring these libations? This is what the Torah says, to accompany the animal offering. You also bring the flour offering with the oil and the wine. To me, it's always most powerful about this verse is right after the children of Israel are cut down, that their dream is not going to be immediately fulfilled of going into the land of Canaan. The very next verse is Ki tavo, that when you will come in, and Rashi says, "Biser lahem sheyikansu la'aretz." Rashi says, this is a promise to you. Hashem promised them that they would have entered the land. Meaning to say, the Be'er Yitzchak explains, we would have expected this passage about the libations and the meal offerings to appear in the context with the other sacrifices. So why is it coming here right after the episode of the Miraglim? It's to tell us that the Bnei Yisrael, despite everything, they will enter into the land. That's how the Be'er Basada explains it. Alternatively, there's another explanation, means to say that it's a promise to them that they're ultimately going to enter, meaning to say, even though you have your dream interrupted, it doesn't mean your dream will not be fulfilled. So that's the passage of the libations, which comes immediately after the story of the Miraglim being cut down. And then it says another law that the next basic paragraph teaches us. A second law that has to do with when you enter into the land, when you eat from the bread of the land, tarimu truma Hashem. That this is the mitzvah of challah. That when you eat from the bread of the land, you have to separate a tithe. You have to take a portion. I remember, by the way, I see Aya on the Zoom, and I remember our friend George wrote a beautiful piece about challah. That was very special. He really researched that well. Never forget that when he was researching it. And whether it's related to this mitzvah of challah here. So there's challah on Friday night, and there's this mitzvah of challah, which still applies today, but a Kohen can't eat it, so it's typically just burnt. It's always burnt. But this is the mitzvah of challah, and the biblical level, which is different than the challah that we eat on Friday night, or presumably different. George was exploring the connections. A person, when you take the first of your dough, you have to separate challah, tarimu truma, kitrumas goren. You have to separate a portion like you separate truma to the kohen on the threshing floor. So too, you have to separate a portion, and basically, that's so you have to separate this portion and give it to the kohen. And it says mireshit ariso techem, from the first of your dough, titnu Hashem truma l'dorotechem. You shall take for your kneadings an offering for all your generations. So this is the mitzvah of challah. Since Am Yisrael is in a war right now, I want to say, and maybe I should have found it for you. There's right at the beginning of the war, like one of the first hostages to be saved. She was rescued, one of the first hostages to ever be rescued by the IDF since October 7th, was a woman. And the night before she was rescued, there was a gathering in her home, and some people in the community said to her mother, if you've never done this mitzvah of separating the challah, making the bracha and separating the challah, you should do this mitzvah. It'll be a segula, it'll be a good symbol for redemption because it's when you come to the land, and so you're going to come to the land and you do this mitzvah of challah. And she did this, and then the very next day, miraculously, she was saved. I just want to say that since I said miraculously, my daughter sent me a poem this morning, and I will read to you the poem because we're talking about miraculously. This is what the poem says. Hold on, let me read to you this poem. The poem says the following. The poem is by Yehuda Amichai. If anybody's read it, heard it, fine. I'll read it for you in English. He says, from far away, everything looks like a miracle, but up close, even a miracle doesn't look like one. Even a crosser of the divided Red Sea saw only the sweating back of the walker in front of him and the movement of the large thighs. Meaning to say, there are so many miracles around us, but we don't, from up close, nothing looks like a miracle. It's only when you go far away that you see the miracle. Even the person who crossed the sea, didn't realize it was crossing the sea, just saw the sweat on the person's back. Let me pause for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to have to shut my video because I'm reading from the Sefer HaChinuch so people can understand more about this mitzvah, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the question that Bruce asks, which is, why is this mitzvah apply even outside the land of Israel? So first, whenever we have a question like that, we go to the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch was this anonymous work, although now most people think it was written by Rabbi Pinchas Halevi in the 14th century Spain. And in mitzvah, he wrote this work anonymously as a guide to his bar mitzvah child. So in mitzvah 385, he discusses the mitzvah of challah. He says, first of all, what's the reason for this mitzvah? Is shechayuso shel adam bibezonos. A person's livelihood or sustenance depends upon food, and most of the people live with bread. So therefore, God wanted to give us a mitzvah at all times with our bread, so that this blessing will rest on, that there'll be a blessing should rest upon it, and we should receive a merit in our souls. And so as a consequence, the dough will be the food for our body and also the food for our soul, because the dough is not only the food for our body and that we eat, also the food for our soul, because we're going to get a blessing as a result. And also so that the servants of God, meaning to say the Kohanim who serve God, will also get sustained. They're always engaging in his service. And and they work for him nonstop. And so it's not enough that it's not the same, even though they're getting the food from the granary, i.e. the grain, that they have to work for, because they have to take the flour and take the berries and turn them into flour, grind it up, and then turn into flour and then cook it. And here it's much easier. You just give them the dough. Now, this mitzvah, what are the laws of this mitzvah? The laws are that the obligation begins not from the time that the dough is placed into the trough, but for the time of the rolling. Means, say, the mitzvah comes once it's turned into dough, from the time the water and the flour are mixed. And what's obligated in this mitzvah of challah, to give a portion to the Kohen? There are wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Those are the 5 types of doughs made from those grains. And if you didn't separate it from the dough, then you could separate it from the bread. So if you forgot to separate from the dough, you can also separate it from the bread. And let's say somebody first needed a quantity that was insufficient in challah, and then you put in another batch and mix it together, then you combine it from there. Anyway, he goes into some more esoteric laws about this, but then he says, the measurement of challah ein lo shiur yadua min Torah, means to say how much of this challah do you have to give to the Kohen? There's no specific amount. And even if one separated only a barley grain from the kneading, he would exempt the whole dough, the whole batch. Means to say there's no minimum amount, biblically speaking, of how much to give. Even if you give just one barley corn, that would be sufficient. It just says Reshit Arisotechem. So anything that he sets aside is sufficient. But the sages say you have to separate 1/24. Basically means to say, because it says Reshit Arisotechem, it says the first of your dough that you have to Hitnu Hashem, you have to give to God. So therefore it needs to be, the phrase says there needs to be a shiur matana, an amount of a gift. So therefore it's 1/24, and if you're a professional baker, it has to be 1/48. And so, meaning say he can give less. Okay, now the dough that was needed from the 2 ends of the trough, and neither is sufficient, are not obligated unless they touch each other. So then they talk more laws. And they go through more laws, meaning to say, let's say there's dough of an arnona, meaning to say that a Jew and a Gentile share in it. So then they give the laws about that. Basically, okay, so now we go to Bruce's question. So Bruce says, does this law apply outside the land of Israel? And here we have the answer in the Sefer Chinuch. It says in the Sefer Chinuch, Noheges b'scharim b'nekeves. This is a mitzvah on males and females. Be'eretz Yisrael bilvad mid'oraisa. Biblically speaking, this law only applies in the land of Israel, as it states, "Ba'achalchem milechem haaretz," when you eat from the bread of the land. But that's only when all of Israel is there, i.e., the majority, meaning when you come in, when the majority of the people are the land. But nevertheless, and that's based upon the Gemara in Ksubos, Chaf Amud Aleph 28. Nevertheless, rabbinically speaking, we divrei sofrim, that's how Maimonides rules, we have to separate challah even outside the land of Israel, so that we don't forget the law of challah, so that the Jewish people always remember this law of the challah. And so therefore, since the law is only obligated so that we don't forget the mitzvah of challah, we have a lot of reasons to be lenient. So what do we do with it? We take out, we only need to take out a small portion, an olive-sized portion, even if it's a very big batch of dough, and we throw it into the fire, and nobody eats it, not a minor or an adult Kohen. And says the Sefer Chinuch, Shamati, I heard that there are some places that they have the practice to separate large amounts of challah, like the amount that the sages said, like 1/24, I guess. And then they would give it to a minor katan who is no longer who's not capable of becoming tamei from tuma that comes out of his body, or to a female katan, a female katana, kohen, a minor, kohen boy or minor girl, and or even an adult who had gone to the mikvah. And even though they've come in contact with the dead, they have to practice to feed it to him in those places. So he says there's some people who do that. And he says, and also it seems that you could be lenient on the challah outside of the land of Israel, that a person can, let's say you're not sure if it got mixed into a mixture, but even if it didn't, you can mix it in ideally into the majority. And so you can nullify it. So basically, if you have this portion of dough that you separated, what you could theoretically do, according to Sefer Chinuch, you're allowed to throw it back into the pile of dough, and it'll be nullified in the majority. Even though generally speaking, we don't allow you to nullify. We don't allow you to take a small amount of chicken and throw a small amount of milk and throw into your chicken soup and say it's less than 1/60th, and so therefore it's nullified, because we say we don't initially set out to nullify a prohibition by having it absorbed into a larger amount. By challah, outside of Israel, we're allowed to do this. Okay, anyway.
Basically,
hold on one second.
So basically, it doesn't really apply outside the land.
Well, hold on one second. Let me just finish the, hold on one second. The Rambam writes as follows. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. I'll come back to you in a moment, Bruce. He says, the Rambam writes in Sefer Zerayim, Hilchos Truma, Ubikurim, in the 5th chapter, nowadays that there is no pure dough because everything is impure because it comes in contact with the dead. Challah, which is separated once in all of Israel and is burnt, meaning to say, everybody only separates the 1/48th, not 1/24th anymore, and we always burn it. And then it's like it has Ikar min Torah, and this has a foundation from the Torah. And then he says, hold on one second. And then he says, since its main obligation is only rabbinic challah, it is outside of Israel, it's not prohibited to be eaten by a kohen unless he has impurity that emits from his body. And so therefore, actually a minor kohen can technically eat it. So just to summarize, and then we'll go back to Bruce, basically summarize what we're saying, is that this mitzvah of challah is, biblically speaking, really not applicable anymore today, even in the land of Israel, because we don't have, even though they have the majority of the people the majority of Jews now live in the land of Israel, nevertheless, that only applies when we know each tribe. So basically, the mitzvah is done so we don't forget about the mitzvah. So don't forget that this mitzvah exists. And we have to be ready for when the mitzvah is biblically obligated again. And so therefore, we do this mitzvah even outside the land of Israel. And what the purpose of the mitzvah is for us to have a blessing on our souls like on our body. Basically, we're blessing the food and also give Kohen the food as it's ready to eat. So this is something very good. Thank you for pointing it out, Bruce. And we'll go back to your question. Yes. Okay. So we're off to a slow start today because we were supposed to do a survey of this whole half and then start moving backwards, but we got sidetracked. Thankfully, we got sidetracked and we had to review ourselves the laws of challah. So then after we go over the laws of challah, we actually have another law, which is it's often overlooked. It says then the mitzvah is it says in the verse v'chi tishku, if you make a mistake and you don't do any of the commandments that God spoke, any one of the commandments that God commanded you from when you left Egypt, and if the whole community does this mistake, then the community has to bring a bull as an offering as an olah offering, and this is called the bowl of the communal offering. What type of sin are we talking about here? So even though biblically speaking, when we read the text, it sounds like any mitzvah. Here, the Rashi tells us we need the Torah Shelach, the oral law, to tell us that we're talking about idolatry, and so the verse is talking about idolatry. So it's one commandment which has all of the commandments combined. And so therefore we're referring to the mitzvah of idolatry. So what we're being told is if you commit a sin, if the whole community commits a sin and error, they can bring a bull as an oil offering, and they have to bring a goat as a sin offering. So first of all, this, to my mind, why is this mitzvah being brought here? Because the whole community just did a sin. They just did the sin of the meraglim, and so they need to know that they can achieve atonement for it. They didn't do it intentionally; it was an accidental sin. They were led astray, and so that's what's occurring here. But then at the end of this paragraph, it says "V'chipera Kohen" in verse 25. I want to just make sure everybody reads this. It says in verse 25, "V'chipera Kohen I'll call Adat B'nai Israel." The Kohen will atone through these offerings, through this goat for a sin offering, for the whole community of Israel. V'nislach lahem, and he will atone for them kishgagahi, because it was an unintentional sin. And then it states they'll bring their sacrifices. And then verse 26, V'nislach l'chol Adat B'nai Israel, v'lager agar b'tocham, ki l'chol ha'am b'shgaga. And this is just like one of the most esoteric passages in the Bible. We're talking about a communal sin offering. I mean, where not too many people give the sermons about this verse. You know, it's right in the middle of this sacrifice that we certainly don't bring today because we don't have a temple. But the verse is a very powerful verse. Does anybody know when we read this verse? The Nislach l'chol Adat B'nai Israel shall be forgiven for the entire community and for the ger who dwells amongst them, because the entire people sinned unintentionally. Does anybody know when we read this verse?
Yom Kippur.
Very good. When do we read it on Yom Kippur? When do we read it on Yom Kippur?
When he approaches the ark. Right?
When do we read it on Yom Kippur?
When he approaches the ark, right, and does the sacrifice. No, that's not when we read it.
Towards the end of the day.
Any other guesses? I mean,
I think every one of the 5 prayers, no?
Yeah.
it's one of the 5. Yeah, it's in.
No, I'm saying actually, besides Kol Nidre, we say it in every one of the 5 services, no?
Yeah, fine, but we say it at the very, very start of Kol Nidre, even before the 5 prayers. It's the first thing we say on Yom Kippur. The first thing, right? Hold on one second. Let me get the mouser here. The first thing we say on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yosef, can you pull up the Sefaria mouser for Yom Kippur? Can I make you the co-host and you'll pull it up? I'll make you the co-host, Rabbi Yosef. Can you pull it up here? And then we say right at the very beginning of Yom Kippur, it is a powerful verse. Basically, everybody's being forgiven. Like we ourselves are forgiving everybody there. Did you pull it up, Rabbi Yosef? Let me see. No, not yet. So I think it's like very, very powerful. That this is what we're saying Yom Kippur night.
I'm getting there.
Okay, fine. I mean, I could just go get a mouser, but I would have to get up, and that's 10 feet. So this is quicker than 10 feet.
Yom Kippur?
Yeah. Go to the Kol Nidre. We say Or Zarua. Can you have it?
It's loading. I'll just share the screen and see it immediately.
Okay, there we go.
Hmm? It's really weird.
I'm just gonna get them out, sorry. Oh, here we go. Okay, there we go. Kol Nidre. Go to Kol Nidre. Yeah, right. Go down. Or Zarua Tzaddik.
This is Ashken, it's not.
Here. What are you reading there? Oh yeah, Shlach. And right above that, right after we say Or Zarua Tzaddik, the very first thing we say on Yom Kippur is this verse. So we say, this is the first thing we say on Yom Kippur, basically. This verse. So this is the first thing we say on Yom Kippur. This verse. And then basically we're saying that everybody is forgiven. And it's coming after the sin of the spies. So anyway, that's something I want to point out to everybody. I'm recording. And I realized, okay, so then it says, and the next one talks about an individual who sins. And here again, we're talking about the sin of idolatry. If you accidentally worship idolatry, and again, it goes through the practices there. And so then it says the concept, the next passage after that is also a very, very powerful passage, which is a lot to talk about, but I don't want to start with that today either. And that's the passage known as the mekoshesh. Mekoshesh. That this is the person who is mekoshesh eitzim. He gathers the wood, and Moshe doesn't know what to do with him until he asks God. And God says to Moshe, you have to strike him. The Gemara in Eruvin discusses that maybe this person who was the mekoshesh was the father of Tzlafchad. Was Tzlafchad. And because they said our father did not die with the sin of the spies, he died with his own sin. So maybe it was what was his sin? The Gemara has different theories as to what was the sin. Maybe it was carrying, maybe it was piling up. But this is the source of the mekoshesh eitzim on Shabbat, and he's going to be put to death. This is also something, if we have time today, we can come back and discuss it. But actually, I want to share with you something I thought about this week. This week, as I was writing the Torah, I thought of the mekoshesh eitzim. I'm sure many people have made this connection, but I never realized it before. It says as follows. It says in Parashas Shmos, it says, as follows. It says that after Moshe comes back to tell Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, it says he comes to Bnei Yisrael, and what does he say there? He says, here. So in chapter 5 of Exodus, it says that in Pasuk Yud Aleph, when Moshe goes to Paro and says, let the Bnei Israel go, on that day, what did Paro say? He says, no longer give them straw. They have to go and collect the straw for themselves. They have to do it themselves. And then it says that the people went out in verse 11, in verse 12, they went out to gather their straw to make their own, basically, their own bricks. They had to go out and collect the straw. And so, this is the same word. That's what I was noticing when I wrote this passage this week. Here's the same word, mekoshesh, mekoshesh, kash. In our parasha, we have the mekoshesh etzim. And all of a sudden, it was clear to me, what's so terrible about what this man is doing? You know, of all the things to talk about, the mekoshesh etzim, this person is somebody who's gathering the wood. What's so bad about what he's doing? Okay, fine, he's violating Shabbos, but he has to be singled out for all of eternity? He's not the first, I mean, he might have been the first Jew, but he's definitely not the only Jew in the history of humanity to not properly observe the Shabbos. Excuse me, why is he singled out? Why is he singled out in this manner? What's so existentially bad about him? But when I read this passage, it became clear to me. This was the start of their servitude. This was the symbol of their servitude. Symbol of their servitude was that Pharaoh said, you have to go out and collect the straw. You have to be mekoshesh. Pharaoh says, you have to go out and collect. And Bnei Israel were forced to do this. Then Hashem comes along and Hashem tells us, you don't go out for anybody on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you serve me. You serve me. You don't do anything else in the world. Don't be like running after the dollar on Shabbos. Don't feel like you have to go out there and collect. And what does this man do? He goes. He rejects the Shabbos and he wants to be a servant to Pharaoh. He's being a mekoshesh again. Just like he says, I want to go back to being a slave to Pharaoh rather than being a king under God. And that's what's so symbolic about this mekoshesh. He's returning to the servitude of Pharaoh. So that's the idea I was thinking this week as I was writing the Torah, and I thought of the mekoshesh etzim. And so now we come to the passage of tzitzis. And this is the last passage. So I wanted to start with this passage really. After we did the introduction, it took a little bit longer than usual because the whole Torah is so, you can't say a word without just going down like levels and levels. It's just impossible. So first of all, let me just give an introduction to what is this concept of tzitzis? What's the concept of tzitzis?
A reminder of all the commandments.
Definitely is a reminder. Baruch Hashem Shkoyach. It's definitely a reminder of all the commandments. Very good. It is a reminder of all the commandments without question. But it's more than that. It's not just a reminder. Although it is a reminder, it's not just a reminder. It says it's a reminder. It says you will see them and you will remember all the commandments and you will not follow after your hearts and your souls. But it's more than that. It's more than that. What is the passage? It says, and what's the connection between this and the mekoshesh? This goes back to the idea that I was just saying. So this word tzitzis, the word tzitzis is also a reminder. It also means to blossom because the Aaron's staff was the one that was blossoming, and the same word is used there. And what's the one reason that the Torah tells us to wear tzitzis is that it'll be a reminder. But there's another reason. What's the other reason? What are the garments of the tzitzis? What are the tzitzis supposed to have on them? What are tzitzis? They're a garment. There's a garment. What do you do on your garment? You put these tzitzis. What are these tzitzis? What are they literally? What are they literally? Yeah, but what are they literally? Like they're basically strings. They're basically strings. And what are the strings? The strings are patil techeles. The strings are these very special thread that's made out of this tcheles, this special color, which was reserved for sacred purposes. And today we no longer have it, but we're no longer really careful about this. But in the medieval world, there were certain colors, and in the ancient world, there were certain colors and wools and fabrics which were specified specifically only for royalty, like the royal blue, certain colors only royalty could wear. And techeles was the royal color of the Jewish people. The Kohen Gadol wore it, techeles. It was in the most holy items in the temple, and the curtain, it was woven in. So tcheles was the garment of holiness. And so here, Hashem is commanding the Bnei Yisrael and saying, you all have to wear the tzitzis, and you're all wearing the tcheles. Each one of you has to wear the tcheles. What's the purpose? The purpose is not just to remember the mitzvos, because that's insufficient. The purpose is not just to do the mitzvos, because that's also insufficient. Because what does the verse say? The verse says in verse 40, why are you supposed to wear these techelas? What's the whole purpose for it? Leman tizkaru, so you shall remember, but it doesn't end there. Va'asitem et kol mitzvotai, and you shall do all my commandments. And what is the next line? V'yitem kedoshim le'elokechem. You shall be holy unto your God. So you shall do all the commandments, and then you shall be holy. Meaning to say that the purpose of the tzitzit, the fundamental purpose of the tzitzit, is in order to be holy, to teach us to be holy, that each Jew has the ability to be holy, and that's a reminder. Now, where else was this phrase? Where is the phrase Kodesh to God? Here it says Kedoshim le'elokechem. You shall be holy to your God. Where else does the phrase Kodesh LaHashem appear? Anybody know where it appears? Where does the phrase Kodesh LaHashem appear? I know you know this. I know you know this. Who wants to answer this question? Where does the phrase holy to God appear? Okay, what was the name? Let me ask it like this. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he wore a special garment on his head. What was that garment called?
Oh,
What was that garment called?
oh, the little the thing on your head with
The gold frontlet plate, the like forehead, like a bracelet, but on your forehead.
right.
And what's that called?
Forget.
Is it a frontlet?
Yeah, but what's it called in Hebrew? What's it called?
Frontlets between your eyes.
Yeah. What's it called in Hebrew? Anybody remember? It's called I'll give you a hint. It sounds like a word in this passage that we've been reading. It's called what's the main theme of this passage? The tzitzit. And the gold frontlet on your forehead is called a tzitz. It's called a tzitz. And the Kohen Gadol tzitz, which he wore to demonstrate that he was the holiest of the holy, the Kohen Gadol, that said on it, Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. So we were commanded to wear not a tzitz, but tzitzit. And the purpose of our tzitzit is to be holy to God. So we are basically being told that we are all in essence supposed to be like the Kohen Gadol. We are supposed to be, each of us, striving for greatness. Unlike the mekoshesh Eitzim, who was trying to go back to the time of Pharaoh and wants to spend his life collecting wood, wants to forget about Shabbos and just collect wood. We're told that's not the role of the Jew. The role of the Jew doesn't forget about Shabbos and collect wood on Shabbos. The role of the Jew is to be holy to God. To be, each of us is a Kohen Gadol. Each of us is royalty. Each of us is a person who's able to overcome the physical limitations of our situation. We'll not follow after our eyes. We will wear the techeles. We will remember that God led us out of Egypt. We won't be like the mekoshesh who wants to go back to Egypt, which is what the spies wanted it to do. We will not be like those people who want to return to Egypt. We will be above that. We will be holiness. We'll be the Kohen Gadol. That's what, to my mind, is this concept of the tzitzis. And in fact, Rashi kind of hints to this. It says, why does it say, I am God who led you out of Egypt? So God, it's to say, I can be the one to distinguish whether you're using the real techelet, or which comes from the fish, from the snail, or from the, something that came from a tree, a turquoise dye extracted from a tree, and you claim it's techelet. Meaning to say that it looks the same, but it's not the same. And that's our concept, that we need to be striving to recognize that we are not the same, that we are created for greatness, and we strive for greatness. And that's what the tzitzis is a reminder of. I want to take some questions now if anybody has any questions.